welcome to the Catholic Forge, a conversational podcast where we gather to explore our Catholic faith and discuss how it forms our lives. All are welcome to join in this conversation and journey. Thank you for listening. Hey everyone, this is Eric. Welcome to the show. God darn it, John. Hey everyone, welcome to the show. This is Eric in Missouri.
And this is John in Illinois.
John, I finally convinced someone to come into the dungeon of my studio, and it's our dear friend, Jenna. Jenna, welcome to the show.
Thanks.
Now, you are here. We have still not figured out why.
Are you there freely is the question first. Set all of our listeners at ease. You are freely recording with us, correct?
I am freely recording, okay. Yes. True
all
statement.
Right. Thank you.
Very good. And we appreciate you being here. You're traveling through from Topeka, Kansas.
Yes.
And here you are in Independence, Missouri. And tomorrow you fly back to
Cincinnati.
That's right. And what is it you do in Cincinnati?
I am a high school math teacher.
What kind of math?
I was hoping she was going to be part of a WKRP. Get our show on the radio.
That would be awesome. And what kind of math do you teach there, Jenna?
I teach geometry and algebra 2 currently.
She's very smart.
She is. Now, let's just see, John. Let's test the smartness. Jenna, whenever we have a guest on the show, we ask an all-important question. Do you know what the question is?
9 times 10. 3 times 2.
This is not that kind of show.
Sorry. She wasn't doing very well. Go ahead.
We ask, do you know what the question is?
I do not know what the question is.
It's a hypothetical question, and I stole it from John's late 90s youth group icebreaker book, okay?
Oh, good.
If you could have one superpower, which would it be and why?
I got asked this question about a week ago.
Okay.
So clearly we haven't outlived John's 90s icebreaker questions. And my answer then, which I stand by, is teleportation. I don't know if you count that as a superpower.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, I would pick teleportation mostly because I have now lived in a lot of places and met a lot of people from a lot of places. And so I would love to be able to go see them whenever the heck I wanted to.
So,
now,
John, please, go ahead.
Would you have to be able to see the location? Like, do you have to have a picture of it to teleport there or be able to see where you're going? Because, in the Looper. You don't want to end up in the middle of a wall or something like that. That's always a danger with teleportation. So how is it that you do your teleportation from one place to another? I mean, and not teleport and there's another person standing in the exact spot that you are going to rematerialize.
That's a good point.
This is something I've never considered. But, I feel like in the day and age of FaceTime and technology, I could probably, FaceTime someone in said location and make sure there's a spot for me to teleport to without teleporting on top of somebody.
Now, but what if, though, you want to be like go to the Fiji Islands or something like that, and you've never been there? Do you have to see a picture, or can you just be like Fiji and you've got a homing pigeon in your head that gets you there?
I mean, if I can have superpowers, I'm pretty sure I would make it so I could just, be like, okay, this is what I want to be and make it happen.
So now, if you could... if you could just think of a place and be there, could you also think of a time and be there? Or is this just location-specific teleportation and not time moving through the fabric of time? Your thoughts?
My first thought was, if it's a superpower, why not do everything? My subsequent thought was, probably shouldn't mess up time, because things get a little complicated in there, so we're going to probably leave time alone.
That might be wise.
That is a remarkable superpower. That was very well done. Maybe at the end we'll have a little rapid fire hypothetical question.
Okay, great.
Okay, we'll see. And that's much easier. You're a teacher in high school. You have had associations with the church for how long?
I mean, I would say technically my whole life. Seriously, since I was probably for the last decade or so.
Okay. And without revealing your age so as to discourage, creepy predators or whatever, you were in your approximate mid-20s. And so you belong to a group of people that we talk about a lot on the podcast. We could throw out millennials, but we needn't really label. John, did they just Generation Z or P or whatever? I don't know. We're very interested about what outreach looks like to them, to you. But even more so, really kind of fascinated by the position of these people, the dissatisfaction with the church, this sense of what we hear, the church isn't listening. Or
you're leading the witness.
A little bit. Oh, I didn't even get to the whole character witness part, did I? No, so you're a character witness. Welcome. But I am leading the witness, it's true. Could you just share some of your experience in general of maybe sort of your walk of faith? And then could you speak to the experience of your generation or your peers, your colleagues, your friends, maybe friends who have, I would say abandoned, I don't mean to say abandoned the faith, but have left the faith or,
may not be engaged in the church.
Sure. Speak freely, please.
Well, I would say that I had an interesting, personal faith life that kind of started though going to a Catholic school kind of started in Protestant youth groups, hanging out with local neighborhood kids. And those people were very, on fire for Jesus. They were the people who were like, I love Jesus, and were very passionate about it, which was really interesting to me initially. But they were also just really welcoming people who, I don't know, made me feel like I had a place. And I think that was very essential. And then I subsequently stumbled upon John's youth group and his wisdom that told me a little bit about the Catholic Church that I maybe ignored because it was complicated.
Sure.
And so John kindly unpacked that for me, mostly with me asking stubborn questions and him giving intelligent responses. Mm-hmm. And then I feel like we had this nice little merge thing of that, passionate in love with Christ, but also understanding the truths of the Catholic Church. So that was kind of really cool for me. And that was something I took with me to college. And I went to a more conservative Catholic college. So I went from a contemporary church to a group of people of the chapel veil wearing Latin Mass flavor.
Mm-hmm. I was wondering why you were wearing the veil now.
So it was kind of a spectrum, and now I'm currently working on my master's degree through another Catholic university, but one that's a little more on the, laid back flavor of Catholic. So kind of seeing that whole spectrum.
So your entry into Catholicism, I see some layers there. First of all, you said specifically, you mentioned the feeling of belonging. And I think you made that referentially to the Protestant youth groups, but would you also say that in the youth group that John was leading at the time, you found that same sense?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
That sense of when I was in college, they rebranded our college as whatever it is, to try to bring in more students. And of course, they had to choose the most just believe, belong, become, John. Ugh. Everyone hated it. It didn't work. That's why the school I went to at college is now closed. Anyway.
It's closed because you went there?
No, because there's one slogan.
Don't help him out. Come on.
Yep, didn't believe, didn't fit in, became nothing. Okay, in my mind. I'm sorry, Dad. I'm sorry, I love you now. Okay. But your experience, the conversion, in the head, like you said, the tough questions, but also in the heart. You went through both. I would say, the Catholic Forge. You went through this crucible of thought, and then now progressed through all these different levels of the Catholic world. What does your? I mean, just in a snapshot, what does your faith life look like now?
That's a great question. I think that for me, it's simple things. So I start my day with a coffee date with Jesus, mostly because I need a lot of grace to get through a day of high school teaching, but also kind of just relying on God to help me love my students all the time. So I start my day with coffee with Jesus. We do a lot of service opportunities with our students, which is something that's kind of become more important in my faith life. And then just trying to find time for other things like adoration or daily mass, which is rare because they don't like to have daily mass times for teachers. But
Sure.
But finding things for those kind of things as well. But I think for the most part for me, it's just kind of starting my day and giving my day to God and asking him for help to live that well.
A very robust, I would say, daily spiritual experience. Now, John, I can see your mind grapes are working over there. I want to ask one more question, and then I'm going to let John off the chain. I always have to hold him back a little bit, but it makes the episode more exciting when he really gets excited. Now, I know a little bit about you because we have been friends, so much longer than you have ever known John. But
it's all dirty, rotten lies. Dirty, rotten lies.
I know that you have had some experiences, adventures in the faith. I'm specifically thinking of, and I want to bring this up specifically because I'm betting, John, if I had to roll the bones on it, I bet 0% of our listeners, all 4 of them, have any idea that this outreach exists, and that is Crossroads. No, not the non-denominational church at the downtown in your local town, but tell the people about your experience with this ministry.
Yeah, it's called Crossroads Pro-Life, so we can separate that from all the other Crossroads things. And they sponsor walks across the country. The United States, they also have walks in Canada, Ireland, Spain, Australia, some other places. And so when I was in college, I spent a summer, I flew to Los Angeles, met a bunch of other random college-age students, and we walked from Los Angeles to Washington, D.C. Our ministry was just conversation with people, so we wore fluorescent yellow shirts that just said pro-life across the front, and we walked all the time, and people thought we were crazy, so they would stop and chat with us, and so we were able to have discussions with a lot of people just kind of in a lot of small towns and throughout the country. And then we also we spent a lot of time in prayer. There was a good amount of sacrifice, and on the weekends we would stay with host families and pray outside abortion clinics in major cities and speak at different parishes.
That's amazing.
It is. I really want to ask you about the group of, set aside, I want to come back to talk about your high school teens and kind of dive into some of the stuff that's there, but more about your peers. We see a very, I'm leading the witness now, I accused Eric of it, kind of an apathetic culture to faith. What has been your experience and the people that you encounter? If you kind of had to take a temperature of the people around you in your life, how is faith going out there in the world?
I think that there's a spectrum. So I definitely have some friends who are just on fire for Christ and are living their lives well and striving to be the best version of themselves. That's not a copyright phrase, but and do good things. And so I think that there are plenty of those. And then I have plenty of friends who would just fall on the complete opposite end of the spectrum and have no belief in a whole lot of anything. Some of whom can acknowledge good points in faith, but maybe can't quite make it seem worth it to them, I guess. And then I guess I would say I have friends who fall in the middle. Friends who would more or less call themselves Catholic or Christian of some sort, but are
struggling with the daily struggle.
Yeah. I've noticed a lot of, but also a lot of not knowing that. I don't know. I think to some extent it's like I have friends who would say that they're good Catholics who don't go to Mass every Sunday or things of that nature. So people who would say that they are faithful, but maybe aren't following all of the teachings. But they are okay with that, and that doesn't seem like a bad thing to them, I guess.
Yeah. Now, we were recently actually had a conversation. We were talking about some of the people that you'd been in youth group with, and some of your friends outside the church, and their journeys. And we were talking about how some of them had moved away from the faith, or just were kind of apathetic towards it. And that seems, when I'm working with people, that seems to be what I come up against, is kind of, I'm not anti-church necessarily, I'm not anti-God, it just takes so much effort or time to be there. And that was one of the things that I heard you kind of saying about some of those friends. Is that correct? Is that a correct analysis? And if so, what are some of the ways that you think we could meet the needs of those people?
I would say that that's a fairly correct statement, and I would say that about people my age, and I would say that probably about my students as well, in that there's this, kind of like it's easier to not put in work to do anything. Like, a lot of people, easy way out is, so kind of, I noticed, especially as a lot of people went off to college, it was kind of the majority of people around you are, going out on Friday and Saturday night, and it's easier to not wake up and go to church on Sunday, and it's easier to just do what everyone else around you is doing. And I think choosing to continue to live your faith is a hard choice, and I think that a lot of people my age and a lot of my students, don't like to make hard choices, and subsequently don't like to put in the hard work that follow those choices. So that's definitely something that I would agree with, having noticed.
You're somebody that has never been afraid of hard choices and doing crazy stuff. During college, you made those hard choices to hold on to your faith, to kind of skip some of the parties or the things that would have led you away from your faith. Now that you've gone through that, was it worth it? You gave up all those great experiences and memories to be able to talk about forever about how drunk you were that one night, or how crazy you were. You gave that up. Do you miss having lost those opportunities?
I have those moments where I'm like, what if I had been like everyone else? And then I'm kind of like, no, I think I turned out okay. So I can't really speak for what would have happened, and sure, maybe I'd have more stories, and there are social gatherings where you're like, man, I wish I had some stories to tell here, but I don't have any.
Sure. But so the question I'm asking is, was the reward of the relationship you have with Christ and where you said, was it worth the sacrifice that you made? You said it was about hard choices, so you made hard choices to hold on to your faith. Was that worth it?
Yeah, I would absolutely say that. Being able to tell a drunk story at a social gathering is not worth, your soul and your, well-being and ultimate joy in life. So.
All right, Eric, you look like you got a question there.
Well, I have lots to say. First of all, Jenna, you may refer to the episode of the Catholic Forge about drinking. And all the stories that Ben and I tell about being drunk do not end well. 2, there was an article recently in America magazine. Now, John doesn't care for that much, but I thought that there were some excellent points in this. And the time, I'm going to click over here. I'm sorry you got to put up with my clicking and clacking here. But the title of the article is, Yes, Millennials Like Brunch. But that's not why they're skipping Mass. And in this article, and by the way, you can check out the description box if you're on YouTube, and you can find the link to it there. Jackie Simmons, from the article in September, she kind of lays out the position of some people in the, to say, quote, millennial generation, who would say exactly what you did, that faith is hard. And specifically what you said, getting up after frivolity is difficult. Now, in the context of the article, we're talking about young families, like John's family, when you got a baker's dozen kids, getting them there, having an actual worshipful experience, so on and so forth. I think that we can see that. We can see that yes, faith is difficult. It takes another level, another layer of sacrifice, of commitment. This, of course, is no surprise. It's what Jesus laid out precisely in the Gospels. There was no sly speech, when we hear about taking up one's cross and following after Jesus. There were no mistakes there. At the same time, what I appreciate about this article is that it also highlights another element of that generation. That being, it's not just about church being hard, but this sort of growing dissatisfaction. I would say that you spoke to that somewhat when you talked about people who are not necessarily anti-faith or anti-even God, who might even say, you can say yes or no, who say they're spiritual, but they're not religious. Do you see what I mean?
I know some of those people.
So they'd say, "Oh, I love Jesus. He's my homeboy. Jesus is my boyfriend. We go on dates all the time. But I don't go to church because I don't believe in the rules of the institution." What do you think?
I mean, obviously I don't agree with that statement, but I agree with the statement that people say that, yes. I mean, I think that that's a common, definitely something I have heard a lot. I think that you have people who are going to keep going. I feel like you've got a lot of people who are going to keep going to church, but with that whole, I pick and choose what rules, because rules are just rules, and I'm going to pick the ones I want. And then I think you subsequently have the people who just kind of abandon the whole structure of, quote, rules, and then, pull the I'm spiritual but not religious. I don't need an institution because I have a relationship.
I can love God and worship God without going to church.
Right.
So back to John's question, what can we do? Not only what can we do, like as in this little podcast we have, this little outreach we have, as it were, but what do you see your position being as colleague and friend to these people? What methods of outreach can be taken to, what are the ways there to say it, but to convince them, to not only come back in, but to embrace the depth of tradition, the beauty of our tradition and of our worship. If you just had to list even one thing that we could do, that we could start doing today, what would it be? And you could think on it.
Like my thought process is kind of the same thing that I guess drew me in, and in that I started in Protestant churches where people definitely had the relationship and the spiritual, but it took good explanations of every controversial thing that I had ever heard in order to realize that it made sense. Because I think that growing up, I went to a Catholic school, and so it was every year you learned some more, quote, rules from the church. Right. And I think that it wasn't until I was like, this is stupid, and I was a stubborn teenager and fought everything, and I had someone who sat there and was like, well, actually, here's why. Subsequent 50,000 reasons. And so
sure,
it's about what it's like to talk to John when you're stubborn. But I think it was quality explanations of the controversial things. And I think that I don't know how that's best practically done, but I think that that's kind of...
Oh, no, that's you said it really well.
I think you gotta, there's a point here that we could tease out of what you're saying. Well, while we're talking about how it's hard to get up to go to Mass, and that's one difficulty that millennials and I think all generations today face and struggle with. I think the bigger one is that first piece. Your faith started in an experience and an encounter with Christ, and that's where the real hard work is. Getting up for an hour on Sunday, that's not actually that much work, but actually setting aside time out of TV and Netflix and my phone and all the wonderful podcasts like The Catholic Forge, all these wonderful things that we have, setting aside time that's dedicated for that relationship with personal Jesus, that's actually what takes the most amount of work. It's pretty easy to go on autopilot to Mass, but I can't go on autopilot in my prayer life with Christ. And so what I'm hearing you say, Jenna, is that was one of the great gifts that you began with. It was that desire for a personal relationship with Christ, and that then led you to hunger intellectually. And that's where we were able to meet you. But would that be the place then where we should be reaching out to our brothers and sisters and the people that you see disenfranchised? would be to help them encounter that Christ, to model. And the way you saw it was being modeled by your friends. You saw that they were in love with Christ. Shaking your head doesn't work on radio.
Sorry, my bad. I'll work on that.
She was nodding affirmatively.
I do the same thing on the phone. It's fine. Yeah, I think that yes. I don't have a coherent statement there, but I agree with that idea of I think the personal experience and the relationship definitely needed to come first, because I think for me it was the order in which things happened was community of people who welcomed me, personal experience with Jesus, and then some intellectual knowledge. And I think that, I don't know, there's some hierarchy of needs in there probably. But I think that was kind of the order in which things made sense.
So for you, it was belong.
Told you hierarchy.
Believe.
Stop.
Become.
Yeah. Something like that.
I mean, I made fun of it earlier, but now that's and I think that's something we see a lot is especially, I mean, we're talking about it at the parish where I work, where we have not a weak ministry system, but we're talking about like small groups specifically, and yes, perhaps borrowing something from the rebuilt nativity movement, but looking at that relational ministry, and this of course is a major shift in the Catholic sphere. I was just talking with my priest about it, and he was talking about his parents when they were going to church. There was no advanced education. There was no Bible study, because at the time they didn't feel it was necessary. You went to church, you received the sacraments, you went to confession, and that was it.
I would disagree with that, though. I hear that quite a bit. But in working with RCIA and a number of people that were raised as Catholics, there was a much stronger Catholic culture in which much of that knowledge of the faith was passed down. And they did go to Sunday school. They did go to those. They had those same kind of catechism classes where they were going and they were learning about Scripture. They may not have called them Bible studies, but that's what they were doing. They were engaging the Scripture and stuff like that. So I want to be careful that we don't undermine that, because like I look at the faith that has come down to me through my grandparents. I mean, my faith really is a product of my grandparents. My grandmother just knew her faith inside and out, and that was transmitted to my mother and to me, and that was not through a formal Bible study, but it was through the church and the community of people. So I want to be careful not to create this picture, because I hear that other side, and I think that's a bit of false notion when we get to that. I'm not calling you out. I'm calling the idea out, though. I just don't want to go too. I don't want to support that narrative that Catholics didn't know anything, or they were just show up to Mass in Latin and didn't know what was going on, because they did know what was going on. We just don't know what was going on because we don't understand the Latin anymore.
Obviously, I mean, Father was speaking of his parents who formed a young man who became a priest. And so clearly, I think that's what he was saying. And the point is that when I was kind of presenting these ideas to him about, what would it look like to embark in, with a small group ministry, he was saying, it's just a remarkable change from when he was young. And at the time, they didn't feel such things were required because the culture was so strong, because there was no question of, do we feel like we belong? Of course we do. This is our parish, and so now obviously the culture's changed. We've been through a whole lot in this last, certainly millennium, but even in this more recent time, that has changed so much of that sensitivity. And so I think a lot of what Jenna has said, and not only do I feel a little vindicated, because it is what John and I have harped on a lot on the show, but I think it's given us some really reasonable, simple ways to move forward in outreach. And that's what we're trying to do here with our little podcast, is to create a community where people can feel like they belong, as it were, to us together in this journey of faith. So I'd say we've gone around the horn pretty well here, John. Do we have any final kind of questions, or did you think of a fun hypothetical for Jenna?
What is the best number?
The best number?
2, 1, now.
I like 17.
Okay. We have it.
So you like 17, or it is the best number?
Oh, good call.
In my personal opinion, 17 is the best number, but I'm a fan of prime numbers, so that's why.
Hot or cold?
In relationship to what? That's not a question.
That is a question. Hot or cold?
Hot.
Dark or light?
White.
Sweet or savory?
Sweet.
Long or short?
Long.
John, you do a couple. Never mind. Okay. This has been the Catholic Forge. Thank you for listening, and thank you, Jenna, for not resisting when I drug you into the basement to record this episode. Thank you.
You're welcome.
It's been wonderful, and we'd like to close, as always, with a prayer and a blessing. May God the Father, God the Son,
and God the Holy Spirit bless you, guard you, and lead you to eternal life. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Amen. Thank you for listening to the Catholic Forge. We hope you've enjoyed this episode and will leave us a positive rating and review on iTunes, SoundCloud, or YouTube, or all three. How about 5 stars for Jenna? You can continue.
She's the only one that deserves it.
You can continue the conversation with us on Facebook and Twitter. You can't continue the conversation with Jenna, but if you have questions for her, we'll send them along, and then she'll probably not respond at all. I don't know, Jenna. Okay,
I'll respond.
I'll respond. Thank you. And you can get a hold of us by reaching us at thecatholicforge@gmail.com. For more information regarding the podcast, visit our website at www.thecatholicforge.com. We especially thank our Jenna-esque wives. John, I don't know about that. I think you're going to get us in trouble. We thank them for their continued support of this project. And we thank you and you, Jenna, very much for listening.